You built this whole thing, right? So you can explain it to my daughter. My name is Damon. I'm 42 years old, and I've been the lead database architect at Nexora Labs here in Kansas City for 12 years. I designed every line of code that runs their $850 million financial data platform. Every client contract, every trading record, every compliance report flows through systems I built from the ground up. But sitting in Mr. Whitlow's corner office that Tuesday morning, watching him gesture toward his 24-year-old daughter Savannah like she was some kind of prodigy, I felt something cold settle in my chest. She was scrolling through her phone while he talked, occasionally looking up to flash a practiced smile. Savannah just finished her MBA at Northwestern, Whitlow continued, straightening his tie. Fresh perspective, you know. She's got ideas about modernizing our approach. I nodded, kept my expression neutral. What kind of timeline are we looking at for the transition? Well, that's the thing. Whitlow leaned back in his leather chair. We want to move fast. Savannah's eager to get her hands dirty. Savannah finally looked up from her phone. I've been reading about artificial intelligence integration in database management. Seems like you guys are pretty behind the curve. I'd been running AI optimization protocols for 3 years, had implemented machine learning algorithms that saved the company $40 million in processing costs annually. But I just smiled and said, always room for improvement. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes. Whitlow talked about fresh energy and generational perspectives, while Savannah asked questions that showed she didn't understand the difference between a database and a spreadsheet. When they dismissed me, I walked back to my office with steady steps. But something had shifted. In 12 years, I'd never missed a deadline, never had a security breach, never lost a single byte of client data. The platform I'd built handled $2.3 billion in daily transactions across 17 states. Insurance companies, investment firms, pension funds, they all depended on the architecture I'd designed. And now they wanted to hand it over to someone who thought SQL was a kind of energy drink. I sat at my desk and pulled up the system architecture diagrams, layers upon layers of interconnected databases, each one secured with protocols I'd written personally. Backup systems nested within backup systems, redundancy checks that ran every 4 minutes. It was beautiful, in its way, elegant. But I'd also built something else into the system, something I'd never told anyone about. A final failsafe, buried deep in the core framework. I'd installed it years ago, during a particularly nasty audit from the federal regulators. Just in case. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. My dad and me the day I graduated from Georgia Tech. He'd been so proud. Build something that lasts, he'd told me. I had. But apparently lasting wasn't enough anymore. I'd started at Nexora Labs straight out of college, back when it was just a 15-person startup operating out of a converted warehouse in the Crossroads district. Whitlow was different then, hungry, focused, willing to roll up his sleeves. We'd work 18-hour days building something revolutionary, a financial data platform that could process real-time transactions while maintaining perfect security compliance. Those early years, we were family. Whitlow would buy pizza for the whole team when we hit milestones. He knew everyone's names, everyone's kids' names. When my mom got sick in 2018, he gave me 2 months paid leave without question. The platform grew. We landed major contracts with pension funds, insurance companies, regional banks. By 2020, we were processing transactions for clients across the Midwest. The elegant architecture I designed could scale infinitely, or so it seemed. But success changed things. Whitlow hired executives who wore expensive suits and talked about maximizing shareholder value. The converted warehouse became a gleaming office tower downtown. The pizza nights disappeared. Whitlow started traveling more, delegating more, trusting spreadsheets instead of instincts. Savannah had been around the office since high school, summer internships that mostly involved answering phones and organizing filing cabinets. She was smart enough, I suppose, but she'd never shown real interest in the technical side. During college, she'd majored in business administration with a minor in marketing. Safe choices. Last month, things started feeling different. Whitlow would walk past my office without stopping to chat. In meetings, he'd ask other people to explain decisions I'd made. Small things, but I noticed. Then came the questions about documentation. "We need everything written down," Whitlow's new chief operating officer explained during a staff meeting. "Institutional knowledge can't live in just one person's head." I'd documented everything, had been documenting for years, but something about the way they asked made me wonder who they thought would be reading those documents. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago. I'd discovered a security vulnerability in one of our client interfaces. Nothing major, but it needed immediate attention. I fixed it in 40 minutes, ran diagnostics, confirmed everything was secure. Whitlow called me into his office the next day. "Damon, we need to talk about protocol. When you make changes to the system, even small ones, you need approval first." "It was a security patch," I said. "Waiting for approval would have left us exposed." "I understand, but Savannah raised some concerns about unauthorized modifications." Savannah had raised concerns about a security fix on a system she couldn't even access. That's when I knew. They weren't planning to work with me. They were planning to replace me. I started making my own plans that afternoon. The email arrived on a Thursday morning at 8:47 a.m. Subject line: Organizational Restructuring, Confidential. Effective immediately, we will be implementing leadership changes in our technology division. Damon Ellis will be transitioning from his current role to provide consulting support during a knowledge transfer period. Savannah Whitlow will assume responsibilities as Chief Database Officer. I read it twice. Then I opened my system administrator panel and checked the access logs. They'd already created new credentials for Savannah. Given her administrative privileges she hadn't earned and didn't understand. 12 years of 70-hour weeks. 12 years of perfect uptime. 12 years of building something that generated hundreds of millions in revenue. And they were handing it over to someone who'd never written a line of production code in her life. The knowledge transfer period was scheduled for 2 weeks. 2 weeks to teach Whitlow's daughter how to manage systems that had taken me a decade to design. 2 weeks to explain security protocols to someone who probably used password 123 for her social media accounts. I walked to the break room and made coffee. Sat at one of those uncomfortable high tables and looked out at the Kansas City skyline. The building where I'd spent my career, where I'd built something remarkable, suddenly felt foreign. My phone buzzed. Text from my brother Jake in Denver. "How's work treating you?" I almost laughed. How was work treating me? Work was preparing to discard me like outdated software. But here's the thing, they didn't understand about database architecture. It's not just about storing information. It's about relationships, dependencies. When you remove a critical component without understanding how it connects to everything else, systems fail. They thought I was just another employee, replaceable, expendable. They were wrong. I finished my coffee and walked back to my office. Pulled up the master system architecture, all those beautiful, interconnected databases that I'd designed to work in perfect harmony. Each one secured with protocols I'd written. Each one backed up through systems I'd configured. But deep in the core framework, buried in subsection 7 of the emergency protocols, was something special. Something I'd installed during those early days when we were young and paranoid and convinced that someday, somehow, someone might try to steal everything we'd built. A kill switch. Elegant in its simplicity. If the wrong person ever tried to take control of the system, if someone without proper authorization attempted to modify core protocols, the system would protect itself. It would erase everything rather than allow itself to be compromised. I'd never told anyone about it. Not Whitlow, not the other engineers, not even the federal auditors who'd examined our security measures. It was my insurance policy, my final failsafe. And looking at Savannah's new administrative credentials, I realized that very soon, the system would detect an unauthorized takeover attempt. I closed the laptop and went home early that day. For the first time in 12 years, the knowledge transfer meeting was scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. I arrived 15 minutes early and set up in conference room B, the one with the big windows overlooking the plaza where food trucks gathered during lunch hours. I'd printed documentation packets, prepared system diagrams, Even created a simple flowchart showing how data moved through our various platforms. Savannah showed up 20 minutes late, carrying a venti coffee and talking loudly on her phone about weekend plans. Whitlow wasn't with her. Sorry, she said, ending her call. Traffic was insane. It was Monday morning in Kansas City. Traffic was exactly what it always was. She sat across from me and pulled out a brand new MacBook Pro. Still had the plastic on the screen. So, where do we start? I started with basics. Explained that our platform managed financial data for 47 major clients. Showed her how transactions flowed from input systems through processing layers to final storage. Described the security protocols that kept everything protected. She nodded along, occasionally typing notes, but I could tell she was lost by the third slide. This seems pretty complicated, she said. Don't you think we could simplify it? Maybe use cloud storage or something? Cloud storage? For $850 million worth of regulated financial data. The current architecture meets all federal compliance requirements, I explained. Moving to cloud infrastructure would require 18 months of regulatory approval. But wouldn't it be more efficient? Not necessarily, and it would cost approximately $40 million to implement properly. She made a note. Look into cloud options. Save money? We spent 3 hours going through basic system operations, how to monitor server health, how to run diagnostic reports, how to interpret error logs, elementary stuff that most database administrators learned in their first week on the job. I think I'm getting it, she said around noon. It's basically like a really big Excel spreadsheet, right? I stared at her. Not exactly. That afternoon, I got an email from Whitlow requesting a meeting. When I walked into his office, Savannah was already there, looking upset. Damon, Whitlow began. Savannah has some concerns about this morning's session. Oh? She feels like you're being deliberately obtuse, making things more complicated than they need to be. I looked at Savannah. She was staring at her phone, avoiding eye contact. The system is complex because it handles complex operations, I said. I can't make federal compliance regulations simpler just for training purposes. See? Savannah looked up. He's doing it again, using all this technical jargon to make me feel stupid. Federal compliance regulations was technical jargon. Perhaps we need to adjust our approach, Whitlow said. Maybe focus on high-level management instead of technical details. High-level management of a database requires understanding technical details. Does it, though? Whitlow leaned forward. I mean, I don't understand the technical details, and I've been running this company for 15 years. You've been running the business side, I said. The technical side has been running itself because the systems I built are robust and stable. Savannah snorted. Systems can't run themselves. Actually, well-designed systems could run themselves. That was the entire point of good architecture. Look, Whitlow said, we appreciate everything you've built here, but we need to think about the future. Savannah brings fresh ideas, modern perspectives. Maybe it's time to consider new approaches. New approaches to a system that processed $2.3 billion in daily transactions without errors. What kind of new approaches? I asked. Savannah perked up. Well, for starters, I think we should implement blockchain technology and maybe some artificial intelligence to automate the boring stuff. I'd been running AI optimization for 3 years. As for blockchain, that was like suggesting we rebuild the foundation of our building using Lego blocks. Those are interesting ideas, I said. Have you researched the regulatory implications? Not yet, but I'm sure we can figure it out. She was sure she could figure out federal banking regulations. I walked back to my office and sat down heavily in my chair. Through the window, I could see construction crews working on a new luxury hotel across the street, tearing down something old to build something shiny and modern, just like what was happening here. 2 days later, I was copying system documentation to an external drive when I noticed something odd in the server logs. Someone had been accessing administrative functions at unusual hours, late nights, early mornings, weekends. I pulled up the detailed access records. The credentials belonged to Todd Brennan, our Chief Information Officer. Todd had been with the company for 8 years, but his access level shouldn't have included the core database modules I'd designed. Curious, I dug deeper. What I found made my stomach drop. For the past 6 weeks, Todd had been creating detailed architectural maps of our entire system. Not just high-level overviews, deep technical documentation that included security protocols, backup procedures, and fail-safe mechanisms. The kind of documentation you'd create if you were planning to completely replace the person who built the system. But there was more. I found email chains between Todd and an outside consulting firm called Zentrin Global. They'd been discussing legacy system modernization and knowledge extraction protocols. The emails went back 3 months. 3 months. They'd been planning this for 3 months. I kept digging, found procurement requests for new hardware, servers that would replace the custom-built infrastructure I'd designed, found meeting notes discussing succession planning and reducing single points of failure. Single points of failure. That's what they called me. But the worst part came when I accessed the executive file server, a system I'd built but rarely checked, since it mostly contained boring administrative documents. Hidden in a subfolder marked Strategic Planning 2024 was a presentation titled Database Operations Transition. It was dated 6 weeks ago. The presentation laid out their entire plan. Phase 1, document existing systems. Phase 2, identify external resources for modernization. Phase 3, implement leadership transition. Phase 4, retire legacy architecture and personnel. Retire legacy architecture and personnel. I was legacy personnel. But slide 12 made everything clear. Estimated cost savings from personnel reduction $180,000 annually. My salary. They weren't bringing in Savannah because she had fresh ideas. They were bringing her in because she was cheap. A recent MBA who would work for half my salary and never question their decisions. The technical complexity didn't matter to them. The 12 years of perfect uptime didn't matter. The hundreds of millions in revenue that flowed through systems I'd built, none of it mattered. What mattered was saving money on my salary. I printed the presentation and walked to my car. Sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes, reading through their plan to eliminate me. They'd been incredibly thorough. Documented every system I managed, every process I'd created, every security protocol I'd implemented. Everything except one thing. They'd documented the systems I'd built, but they hadn't found the systems I'd hidden. Emergency protocols buried deep in the core framework. Fail-safe mechanisms that wouldn't show up in any standard audit. Security measures I'd installed during those paranoid early days when we were convinced someone might try to steal our work. I'd built those systems to protect the company from external threats. Corporate espionage, cyber attacks, hostile takeovers. I'd never imagined the threat would come from inside. But the beautiful thing about well-designed security protocols is that they don't distinguish between external and internal threats. They just identify unauthorized access attempts and respond accordingly. And according to my embedded security algorithms, someone was about to attempt a massive unauthorized takeover of critical systems. I started my car and drove home. On the way, I stopped at an electronics store and bought a new laptop, one that had never been connected to Nexora's network, one with no digital fingerprints linking it to me. I had some research to do and some preparations to make. The final meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Transition celebration, they called it. Cake in the break room, speeches about new beginnings, handshakes all around. I spent Thursday night at home, working on the laptop I'd bought, not planning anything dramatic, just making sure I understood exactly how my own systems worked. The emergency protocols I'd built were elegant in their simplicity. If someone without proper biometric authorization attempted to modify core database structures, the system would interpret it as a hostile takeover attempt. It would implement something I'd called total data protection, essentially erasing all stored information rather than allowing it to fall into unauthorized hands. I'd designed it during those early days when we were handling sensitive government contracts. The logic was sound. Better to lose everything than let it be compromised. The trigger was biometric authentication, my fingerprint, scanned every morning when I logged into the system. If someone else tried to access core functions without my biometric signature, the protection protocols would activate. Originally, I'd planned to disable those protocols before leaving the company. Clean shutdown, safe transition, no problems for anyone. But that was before I found out they'd been planning to eliminate me for months. Before I discovered they saw me as nothing more than an expensive liability. Friday morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully. My best shirt, the tie my dad had given me for my college graduation. If this was going to be my last day at Nexora Labs, I wanted to look professional. The morning passed quietly. I organized my desk, backed up personal files, deleted my browser history. At 11 a.m., I walked to the server room for one final system check. Everything looked perfect. $850 million worth of financial data, organized and protected by systems I'd spent 12 years perfecting. Client records going back to our founding, trading histories, compliance documentation, all of it humming along beautifully. I ran my biometric scan one last time, fingerprint recognition confirming my identity as the authorized administrator. All systems showed green. The celebration started at 2 p.m. Whitlow made a speech about exciting new directions and fresh perspectives. Savannah talked about her vision for modernizing our technological approach. Todd presented me with a plaque thanking me for my years of dedicated service. Nobody mentioned that they'd been planning to fire me for months. At 3:30, Whitlow called me into his office for the final conversation. "Damon, this is hard for all of us," he began, "but we think it's time for you to move on to new challenges." "I understand," I said. "We'll provide excellent references, of course, and we're prepared to offer a generous severance package. 6 weeks of salary for 12 years of perfect service." "That's very kind," I said. Savannah was there too, already sitting in my chair when we walked back to my office. She was logged into my computer, clicking through system menus with the confidence of someone who had no idea what she was looking at. "I think I'm getting the hang of this," she said brightly. I smiled. "I'm sure you'll do great." I cleaned out my desk drawers, a few personal photos, some technical books, the coffee mug my nephew had given me for Christmas. Shook hands with my former colleagues, accepted their awkward condolences. At 4:45, I walked to my car. At 5 p.m., Savannah would attempt to modify core database settings to implement her new approaches. At 5:01, the system would detect an unauthorized modification attempt. At 5:02, total data protection protocols would activate. I drove home and waited for the phone to ring. The call came at 5:17 p.m. I was sitting on my back porch, drinking a beer and watching the sunset, when my phone buzzed. Todd Brennan's name on the screen. "Damon, thank God. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The system is down, everything. The entire database platform just went offline." I took a slow sip of beer. "That's strange. Did you check the error logs?" "That's just it. We can't access the error logs. We can't access anything. It's like the whole system just vanished." "Vanished?" "All the data. Client files, transaction records, backup systems, everything shows as corrupted or missing." I could hear panic in his voice. In the background, other voices. Shouting, urgent conversations, the sound of people who suddenly realized they were in serious trouble. "Have you tried the emergency recovery protocols?" I asked. "We can't find them. Savannah was trying to update some security settings and then everything just crashed." "Security settings, of course. I'm sure it's just a temporary glitch," I said. "Have you contacted the backup data center?" "The backup systems are showing the same errors." "Damon, $850 million worth of data just disappeared. Our clients are already calling. We need you to come in and fix this." I finished my beer. "I'm sorry, Todd, but I don't work there anymore. Remember? I was transitioned out this afternoon." "But you built these systems. You're the only one who knows how they work." "I documented everything. Didn't Savannah mention that during the knowledge transfer?" Long silence. Then, "Damon, please, we need your help." "I wish I could help," I said. "But without authorized access credentials, there's nothing I can do." And since I'm no longer an employee, I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Whitlow this time. "Damon, we need to talk." By Monday morning, the news had spread throughout Kansas City's financial sector. Nexora Labs had suffered what industry analysts were calling catastrophic data loss. 47 major clients had been affected. Federal regulators were launching investigations. The company's stock price had dropped 87% in 3 days. I read about it in the Kansas City Star while eating breakfast at a diner near my house. The article quoted Whitlow saying they were working around the clock to restore service, but anonymous sources suggested the data was completely unrecoverable. No mention of unauthorized system modifications. No mention of Savannah's attempt to implement new security protocols without understanding the existing architecture. Just a tragic technology failure that nobody could explain. My phone had been ringing constantly. Reporters wanting comments, former colleagues asking questions, lawyers representing angry clients. I'd stopped answering. Tuesday afternoon, I drove downtown and parked across from the Nexora building. Through the lobby windows, I could see boxes stacked near the elevators, people packing up their offices, abandoning the sinking ship. The food truck I used to visit during lunch breaks was gone. Probably no customers anymore. I thought about all those years of 18-hour days, all those weekends spent optimizing systems and fixing problems that nobody else understood. The pride I'd felt watching our platform grow from a startup experiment into something that handled billions of dollars in transactions. They'd thrown it all away for a salary savings of $180,000. Wednesday morning brought news that Nexora Labs was filing for bankruptcy. Assets would be liquidated to pay creditors and client settlements. I deleted the article without finishing it. Thursday, I started my new job at a private equity firm in Luxembourg. Triple salary, full relocation package, 5-year contract. They'd found me, not the other way around. Apparently, news travels fast in the database architecture community.